collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up this week, why are hooliganism and delinquency so prevalent in our Cypriot society today?
We haven't been investing in pro-social behavior. Instead, especially violent behavior goes unpunished, and we don't instill the right conscience, and we are lacking the right models for our youth.
And on the weather front, thunderstorms, hailstorms, high winds, and of course dust. We look at the weather picture for the Eastern Mediterranean.
Nowadays, in the last 20 to 30 years, we observe an increased frequency of this phenomena over the area of the Eastern Mediterranean, and not only their frequency is increased, but also their duration and their intensity.
There's been much news in the press for the last 10 days or more about the rise in hooliganism in our country, and it's not only about football matches, although they feature prominently too. Joining us on this week's programme is criminologist Andreas Kaparidis. Andreas, I wanted to ask you whether or not, with your studies over the many years into criminology, you have any suggestion as to why this has become such a big problem in the last, 5-6 months?
I'll do my best to answer the question. From a long research experience and drawing on international experience, Rosie, here in Cyprus, over the years, there have been a number of phenomena that have been converging. The first one is the weakening of the family bond as a way of curtailing antisocial behavior, as a way of socialization. In every society you have what we call socialization agents, the family, the school, and so on. In Cyprus, both have been weakened tremendously the last 2 decades, 20 years. Because in the case of the family, both parents work, and secondly, in the afternoon, a lot of kids in state schools are taken to coaching classes, and as a result, and of course, technology, which has really invaded everybody's home and everybody's free time, now means that kids spend a lot of time away and doing other things other than being with the family. Okay? So the family bond has weakened. Secondly, one of the appalling failures of the education system is to be meaningful to its own pupil population, especially in secondary education. We have a system of secondary education which in some people's eyes is geared towards a Greek education in Greece, but it doesn't prepare them for life outside school. And in addition to that, we have large numbers of kids who have become, I dare say, over the years, alienated. Alienation as a social phenomenon has been around for many years, since the 50s, when it was first explained in the context of delinquency in the United States. Here in Cyprus, young people have been alienated. In truth, this doesn't excuse what they are doing. So what we have is antisocial behavior by young people, and of course in schools, even though it's been going on for a long time, they've been sweeping it under the carpet because many school authorities, headmasters don't want their school to have a bad reputation as far as to be in the bad books of the Ministry of Education, and they don't recognize the problem. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, I mentioned to someone that the addiction rate in the first years of secondary education was 2%. I'm talking about addiction to illegal drugs, narcotics. They said to me, it's very low, we are not worried. And when I pointed out that drug addiction increases in a geometric progression, they didn't want to know. So sweeping problems under the carpet is partly to blame, And finally, I don't want to drag on too much and bother listeners, but finally we have in the long-term results of urbanization away from the country, the decades when most Cypriots used to live in country areas. After the invasion and so on, we've witnessed the phenomenon of rapid urbanization. With it comes the impact when you start living in blocks of flats, when some of the social controls in a neighborhood break down because you no longer know your neighbors.
Yeah.
Gone are the days when some of us feel nostalgic about. So these are some of the factors that contribute. It doesn't excuse. And at the same time, we also have young people who now indulge in what you call wanton violence, WANTON, violence for violence sake. Violence has an end in itself, which is intrinsically satisfying. It's violence for violence sake.
Well, this is all very worrying, and it sounds to me from what you've just said that we are pretty well in a perfect storm. I was going to ask you about several things, and one is the influence of social media and the fact that people can get onto their phones, tablets or whatever and do a lot of, we could call them, in inverted commas, violent things verbally and not have much comeback. But I'm also looking at the lack of discipline, particularly in our schools, and the lack of positive reinforcement for youngsters when they're in the education system. We don't seem to have that either.
I agree with you 100%, Rosie. So we have lack of proper models, if you like. And secondly, in terms of, you mentioned the lack of the discipline in school. The best way to discipline school kids, and whether primary or secondary or even older ones, is to instill the right conscience. And conscience is one set of values. Values underpin behavior, and of course, influence one's attitudes and so on. What we haven't done, we haven't been investing in pro-social behavior. Instead, especially violent behavior goes unpunished to a large extent, and we don't instill the right conscience, and we are lacking the right models for our youth. And I think as a society, we are paying the price for that. The state has no tragic strategy, has no effective, let alone efficient strategy to mold people's conscience along the right line.
Do you have an answer to all of this? I mean, there is no magic bullet, I suppose.
The answer I have is based on empirical experience here in Cyprus, and this might be of interest to our listeners. There was a case when the findings of what I'm going to briefly describe were publicized. The Germans took my team to Germany, and they copied our delinquency intervention program in Germany. We actually exported this knowledge to Germany, and we were very proud of it at the time. I still am. Now, what did we do? We took what you call a troublesome youth, which had come to the attention of the police, school dropouts, etc., starting in my own neighborhood in Nicosia, and we offered them a program which was staffed by specialists on contract in the afternoon, after school. And this was a program called, you can look it up on the internet, because CTC, Communities That Care. The program had been tried and proven very effective in dealing with antisocial behavior amongst youth in the United States and back in the UK and elsewhere. A colleague of mine from Cambridge, Professor Farrington, a dear old friend from Cambridge, was a colleague and a very good friend, was brought out to Cyprus. He presented the program, and then we got funding, outside funding, to introduce this in one suburb. So the kids had the opportunity for constructive activities in the afternoon. And part of those activities involved also getting to know the kids and their problems in school, within their families and in their neighborhood. And then specialists would actually visit those families and deal with the problem in a round fashion, in a comprehensive way, and the same with the cooperation of the school and the police. It was a multi-level analysis combined with a multifaceted approach, and it was extremely effective. And I can tell you something which I can share with some pride, not wishing to boast, but some of those young people that we had in the program years later went on to university, went on with their lives, if you like, in a conventional way, and they became very successful in terms of their occupation and family. And they actually sent an email to myself thanking me for that, for taking them out at the time into this program and getting them on the right way. Not myself, but together with my team.
It's a vicious circle, isn't it, if you don't make some sort of interruption at some point. And it does seem to me that we are missing the opportunities to do exactly that. Why wasn't this rolled out across the island?
It's cost and change of government. We did introduce it in a couple of other schools and neighborhoods with the same success rates, very high success rates, but then funding runs out, and unless a government adopts it at the national level, like they've done in some countries, then the same old cycle repeats itself. I dealt with hooliganism in 2006. We studied them. I actually did participant observation. Then the hooligans were largely evolved around a team from Limassol, and because I grew up in that very neighborhood in Limassol, and I knew some of those characters, I was accepted into that circle of, if you like, antisocial youth, and I used to do participant observation going from football match to football match. And subsequently we were able again to introduce measures together with the police, which, if you like, make good the deficit, and it had tremendous success.
Well, I wanted to talk to you, Andreas, but I think we're not going to have time to cover it in depth on this programme. I wanted to talk to you about the fact that football hooliganism is, as they say, reaching alarming proportions, and I wonder how much that's got to do. I know you've also studied corruption, and the fact that it seems fairly clear that there are corrupt practices going on, that just encourages people to break the law, I imagine.
It's not so much corruption in the way in which the average person understands it, bribing and so on. In Cyprus, what we have in the society that Cyprus is, I'm talking about the Republic of Cyprus, is nepotism. But let's not go into that. What I think underpins what you've said is the lack of coordination, the lack of a national strategy. There are individuals, there are very good professionals in the different ministries and services and so on, but they are not coordinated. We don't have a national strategy which is effective and efficient and monitored and evaluated like has been the case in the past for a short period of time.
What about a national strategy for citizenship and positive citizenship? I'm thinking of things like volunteering, doing things for your community, because, as you said, the nuclear family is not what it was, and youngsters very often don't have the guidance that they perhaps need in order to make the right decisions. Should we be looking at something a bit like one of these award schemes whereby community activity is rewarded?
Yes, I think it could be introduced in schools and it would be very successful contribution to the local community in various ways, different types of voluntary work. And kids, once they've experienced this, once they've had this experience, it's amazing how motivated they become, and then it spreads because other kids want to do the same. It's not so much conformity or keeping up with the Joneses, it's pro-social behavior, which by its very nature is rewarding. And this, I think, that I agree with you, that would be an alternative we could invest in. And so the kids of today, the youth of today will be tomorrow's adult citizens with the right values the right pro-social behavior based on the experience of doing voluntary work and, of course, learning in the process of so doing.
Perfectly put, if I may say so. And of course, we didn't have time either to talk about the fact that the lockdowns and the pandemic have doubtless also had an impact on this and on people's sort of withdrawing from social society, as it were. Do you think that, very, very quickly, Andreas, there is hope for us, or do we need to spend a lot of money and get the government on board?
There is hope. What you need is political will, and my motto has always been, where there is a will, there is a way.
That is Andreas Kaparidis, criminologist, writer of many books, honorary research fellow at the Institute of Criminology at Cambridge University, and also president of the Sport Integrity Committee of Cyprus. Many thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Rosie.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
We've had a weekend with very high levels of dust in the air, and we've had quite extraordinary thunder and hailstorms over the last few weeks here in Cyprus. What's happening to our weather? Well, who better to tell us than the head of the Department of Meteorology in Cyprus, Kleanthis Nikolaidis. Kleanthis, it's not unusual for us to have these differing types of weather, but it does seem to be getting more frequent and more extreme.
That's correct, Rosie. The weather is trying to find out a way out from climate change. What's happening over the area of the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East, especially over this area, is that we are experiencing already the consequences of climate change. Climate change does not suggest only the rise of temperature or the decrease of the accumulated precipitation. It results also in extreme weather events, in frequent heat waves, in frequent dust storms, and by the meaning of the word dust storms, I recall these dust events frequently happening over the area of the East Mediterranean and Cyprus especially during the last years. You know, dust events were a subject of a frequency of 2 to 3 times per year, and that was 40 or 50 years ago. But nowadays, the last 20 to 30 years, we observe an increased frequency of this phenomena over the area of the Eastern Mediterranean. And not only their frequency is increased, but also their duration and their intensity. So, what we had last weekend with the concentrations of almost 850 to 900 micrograms per cubic meter was not a frequent phenomenon, and it is not that frequent during this part of the year. So we observed increased frequency of this phenomenon. High concentrations are starting to getting more frequent, and their duration is also increasing.
Well, the almost 900 micrograms is very worrying, because isn't the safe limit supposed to be, 50 or 80?
It's 50 micrograms per cubic meter for the dust of diameter of 10 microns, and the dust of diameter 2.5 microns, which is almost at the size of a cell, of a human cell. It's 2.5 micrometers. And this is what is happening. When we have an increase of PM10, we have an increase also of PM2.5, and this 2.5 dust is much more harmful to human health because it has the size of a cell, so it can penetrate into our circulation system.
And our lungs and everything else. What struck me was that the readings were much higher along the coast, and one sort of thought that the sea air and the coastal areas would normally, in a sense, blow this away.
Now, what was happening last weekend? We had a southeasterly to easterly airflow At the higher levels, we had a southwestern airflow. Dust was uptaken from the Sahara Desert, Libya, Egypt desert areas, and it was transferred over the area of Cyprus, mainly affecting the southern coastal areas of Cyprus. At the same time, Limassol, Zigi, Larnaca having 800 micrograms of dust concentration, PM10. Nicosia was experiencing also less amount to concentrations of 150 to 200 micrograms per cubic meter. So the main core of the phenomena was affecting the southern part of our island. And if somebody was in the sea area between Cyprus and Egypt, would have experienced much higher concentrations. There are evidences which result to that statement.
Well, that's the dust, and they are, as you said, becoming more frequent and lasting for longer, which is quite worrying. We can expect more of them, I suppose. Is there a particular time of year when you do expect more of this?
The area on which climatologists would suggest that dust phenomena are more frequent was the time period between February and May. So February, March, April, and May, we were experiencing of 2 to 3 dust events, not lasting more than 1 to 2 days each. But nowadays, the recent 30-40 years, we observe that these phenomena are more frequent, not only during the preset period, but throughout the year. We had dust phenomena and episodes of dust over the area of Cyprus. During February, we had this phenomena, not so severe, but we had them.
And the other thing is the thunderstorms and the hailstorms. Enormous hail fell a couple of weeks ago. Is that usual? I don't remember it in the past.
It's not that usual due to the resulting phenomena. We had baroclinic depressions evolving over the area of the Eastern Mediterranean or being created over the area of the Eastern Mediterranean, which resulted in thunderstorms throughout the island, heavy precipitations throughout the island, and hail at some cases. Whereas May is a month in which we can see isolated thunderstorms only due to thermal instability. Whereas during this present May, we had wider thunderstorms happening in more areas than a few over the main plains and the high terrain of the island, not only due to thermal instability, but mainly due to dynamic instability.
What's the difference?
It means that a barometric low is over the area of the Eastern Mediterranean, and not by itself the extra heated soil and the lower part of the atmosphere may initiate the thunderstorm. The main cause of the thunderstorms of May and also of April and March was that a dynamic effect, the upper atmosphere was driving the thunderstorms than the surface of the earth.
It's very difficult, I think, for you as a meteorologist to predict the weather, especially since it seems to be all over the place at the moment. Do you have any tools in your toolbox to give us an idea of what we might expect for the rest of the year?
The weather is trying to figure out the way out of climate change. So everything is in our evolving climate. So many years of knowledge about meteorology and the scientific work on meteorology is now getting into a new era, the era of climate change, of our evolving climate. So the science of meteorology and synoptic meteorology has to adopt the new environment and result in better forecasts. The worldwide forecasts do take into account climate change, but there are a lot to be done in the future years in order to consolidate better conditions.
So I presume that means that you have to look at changing the weather models that you use at the moment, does it?
Maybe this is an issue, yes. Maybe this is an issue. We do not use the climate series of 1961-1990 because it's obsolete. We use the climate charts of the temperature of the era 1981 to 2010 because they have the signature. This climate series has the signature of climate change, but we see that our dry, let's say, winter was followed by the era of spring, which was, as you said, a thundery period, and we had 6 or 7 barometric lows reaching East Mediterranean, which is not the case for every spring.
So it leaves us a bit up in the air what to expect. The other thing I did notice, Cleanthes, was these gusting winds. Does that mean that we might get cyclones or something similar in the future?
The area of the Mediterranean is not an area favored for the creation of extensive hurricanes or cyclones. But recent research has proved that the so-called Mediterranean hurricane, small-scale features similar to U.S. hurricanes, are likely to occur over the area of the Mediterranean, but not reaching yet the area of East Mediterranean. Now, as you said about the high-speed winds, those high-speed winds which we experienced the previous week was due to the creation of the low pressure over the area of the East Mediterranean. As I told you before, we had a barometric low, a baroclinic depression, affecting the area of the East Mediterranean. So what deepened the area was the field of strong winds.
Do we know what causes these barometric lows?
Of course we do know. These are features driven by the upper winds, the so-called jet stream. So the jet stream is a phenomenon, is air of high speed blowing from the equator, let's say, towards the poles, transferring high energy to the poles, but over the poles we have low temperature, and this jet stream is doing like a snake over the north hemisphere and accordingly over the southern hemisphere, curving up and down over the north hemisphere at the height of 37,000 feet, and transferring that energy. According to the curvature of the jet stream, we have creation of barometric lows, of barometric highs. When the curvature is deepening, is coming towards Cyprus and then it goes up again, then we have low pressure creating over the area of East Mediterranean. This is the reason we have these frequent barometric lows over the area of the East Mediterranean the past 3 months.
And they'll continue by the sound of it. Always fascinating to talk about our weather because, of course, if we know roughly what's coming, then we can plan our lives. And I know that you've got a warning out, I think, on your site this morning for more thunderstorms.
Yes, an EMA warning was issued half an hour or an hour ago for midday and afternoon for thunderstorms and local showers, at times heavy. Thunderstorms may be accompanied with hail, and this is something which is expected to affect mainly inland and the terrain of Troodos.
Well, it's good for the garden, perhaps, unless they're huge hailstones. So we'll look forward to not having to water for another few weeks. That is Cleanthes Nicolaidis, head of our meteorology department, and I was speaking to him on Tuesday. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.